And welcome to another edition of Gridiron Nation on TSN, everyone. He is Gord in Studioville. I'm Jim on Football Island, and offense has made its return in our weekly Stateside 5. In at number 5, it is senior safety Jet Elad out of Mississauga, Ontario. 9 solo tackles, a sack, and a TFL for his UNLV Runnin' Rebels. We go all the way out into the Pacific for number 4. It is Nick Senecal, 130 yards all-purpose, 93 of those as a receiver on 7 receptions, and a tutty in a 38-30 win over New Mexico. Daryl Jabome, no stranger to the 5, the junior linebacker out of Longueuil, Quebec. 7 tackles and a sack. He has 102 tackles on the year, the first Canadian to hit the century mark since Eamon Ogbong-Bamiga did it in 2020. Last year's Cornish Trophy winner Alec O'Manor in on the 5, 10 receptions, 109 yards to close out the year for Stanford. And in at number 1, as he has been a number of times this year, it is quarterback Curtis Rourke from Oakville, Ontario. 23 of 31 for 349 yards, and he tied a school record with 6 TD heaves in a game in a 66-0 wipeout of Purdue. So, 3 offensive guys on the podium in our Stateside 5. Let's start with Curtis Rourke. We have a number of times this year. Might as well be consistent across the board, Gord, especially when he ties a school record with 6 touchdown passes in a 66-0 wipeout in the rivalry game against Purdue. That's a great way to close out a season.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a rough year for Purdue, and we did allude to it a little bit on last week's show, that this was not expected to be a particularly competitive match, and it was not. But full credit to the Hoosiers. They came out, and they made sure that this was not going to be a nail-biter in any way, shape, or form. Curtis Rourke at the helm, in control of that. And this continues a trend for them across the entire season, which is that they have been excellent in the first half in every game. And even in the Ohio State game, they came out strong in the first quarter, started to catch some gas from Ohio State a little bit in the second quarter. But they have been really, really good at starting games, getting out ahead, and then playing from ahead. That's really been their MO this season, and they continued that trend here. Rourke throws for 3 of those touchdowns in the first half, and it was over by the half. Surprisingly, they left him in the entire game. He was the only quarterback that threw a pass for the Hoosiers. Granted, I, like most well-minded people, I would assume, turned it off before the end of the game. So maybe somebody came in there and handed the ball off a few times, but they left him in there for quite a bit of time, and it seems that Curt Cignetti understood the importance of not just winning this game, but making a statement that, look, yes, we got beat by Ohio State. People are questioning the strength of our schedule, but it's also worth noting that it's not like we've limped through that schedule. By and large, we have kicked people's butts through this week's schedule, and it's weird to say this, but despite the fact that they're one of the few teams with 1 or fewer losses in the country. In fact, I think they're one of only 3 that have that status. But they feel like they need to justify their existence in the playoffs still because of that big loss to Ohio State. And so they kept the pedal to the floor in this one.
Well, and thanks in part to Miami's loss at Syracuse. I didn't have that on my bingo card. Indiana gets to move up from 10 to 9 in the latest top 25. Let's talk a little bit about Alec O'Manor. We really haven't all that much over the last couple of weeks. And you think that his production is off with only 831 yards receiving. He had 1,000 yards last year. And if you remember, he broke in halfway through the season with his first stats. So he had some big games that really took the nation by storm. But this year he has 1 more reception. The thing that separates him from his numbers last year, from his numbers this year, is just about 2.1 yards per reception. He had consistency this year. And as a receiver, do you think that's really what you want? More consistency, being that go-to guy game in and game out?
Yeah, I think that it makes him a more appealing pro prospect on the whole, that he does have this record of consistent production. What I think that you're really seeing with the numbers there is you're not seeing plays where he's taking the tops off of defenses. And what that tells me, and what that's evidence of, is the attention that secondaries are paying towards Alec Manor. They know that he is going to be the guy in that Stanford offense. So what you're not seeing traditional double coverage where you have two guys that are manned right up on him. But what you do see more often than not is you see the coverage shell is rotated towards his side. So when he does make catches, he's having to make those catches in tighter windows for starters, but when he does have more open space to him, there is a safety rotated over the top that is in position to make sure that he doesn't blow the roof off the defense. And so those opportunities have been essentially non-existent for Manor this year. I think his longest play from scrimmage has only been about 30 yards, and that's been on like a fade ball down the sidelines. He has not had like a 60-yard touchdown or anything like that at all this season. And that's indicative of the way teams have played him. But what I think has been impressive about that, though, is that you see that he has had the ability to make a number of tough catches on a weekly basis. He's not a big separator. He does run good routes, but he's not a big separator. I mean, he has to catch a lot of contested balls. He has done so as well as anybody in the country. I think NFL teams are going to love that particular skill set from him.
Nick Senecal with a great closer this week. 93 yards receiving, another 37 yards on return, so for a total of 130 all-purpose yards, also had a touchdown reception. Here's a guy at Hawaii where when we take a look at some of the other Canadian receivers that have made that decision to dive into the transfer market, they haven't done so well. I want Nick Senecal to stay in Hawaii so he can continue to pile on some numbers and get some notice out there. What are your thoughts?
You read my mind entirely. I don't think it's the obvious comparison is to think back to Nick Mardner about 3-4 years ago, who was in a similar position at Hawaii. He had a 1,000-yard season. He was a really exciting vertical threat for them. And he decided to try and take the jump to the next level, went to Cincinnati at that point, and things kind of fell off for him. He didn't make a big impact at Cincinnati. He then went to Auburn and made even less of an impact. Fortunately for him, he still parlayed that and worked his way into the TFL and being a factor with the Ottawa Redblacks. But his last couple of years in college may have cost him an NFL opportunity because he barely saw the field. And so that's the risk that you run in taking that step up to the next level. And in particular, in this context at Hawaii, and it's not unique this way, but in the context of Hawaii, you're in a very hospitable offensive environment, right? Like at home, you're playing in consistently good weather at all times. And when you're on the road, most of the markets that you're playing in the Mountain West, well, there's a reason it's called the Mountain West, right? It's thin air. It's easy for throwing in, right? And you see a lot of big offensive performances in that conference. It's typically very wide open, and Hawaii typically takes part in that. So it's a very hospitable offensive environment. Senecal knows that he has a prominent role in this team, and he knows that there's enough offensive talent on this team and an offensively oriented coach in ex-CFL or Timmy Chang at the helm, that I think that there's a lot to appeal there. That being said, though, and I don't think that I'm offending anybody by saying this, there's a very hard ceiling for the Hawaii program, right? Like we have seen only a couple times in the last 25 years, a Hawaii program that has won more than 7 games in a season, right? This is a program that cap seems to be about 7-5. And so you're not going to really get onto a big stage at all by the FBS standard, at least, if you stay in that program. That might be okay though, right? Like to make a mark in that neck of the woods is great. And let's be honest, like it's Hawaii. If you're getting paid to be there, not the worst gig, right? So I think that there's a lot to appeal to him to stay in Hawaii. And I would point out too, like he was a leader on this team, but he wasn't the guy, right? He wasn't the star. And I think so there's still that next step, that next mark he can still make at the University of Hawaii. So to tell him that he doesn't necessarily need to leave. So I don't know. The only thing that would cause him to leave is if he really wants and relishes that bigger spotlight, that larger platform to showcase his skills. But I think that there's a pretty strong argument in a lot of ways for him to stay at Hawaii. I would love whatever he wants for himself for him to make that decision. But I would be perfectly fine with him being at Hawaii because I think that he is in a position where that is going to be the best home for him or the most likely place for success for him next year.
By the way, a shout out to Darius McKenzie, the junior linebacker out of Ottawa with South Alabama. 13 tackles and a pass breakup this week, 11 tackles the week before and another pass breakup. Here's a guy that didn't do too much out of the chute, but has really found his way with USA, and I expect some big things out of him as a senior next year. When we return, we will talk all about coaching. Stick around. And welcome back to Gridiron Nation on TSN, everyone. Now I'd like to welcome Alex McComb to segment 2. And Alex, you're a Western grad, and Gord is a Queens grad. Are you guys going to be okay here?
Yeah, there might be some a little bit of cat fighting, but I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Western had the upper hand on Queens during your time there. Would that be correct?
I think so. Yeah, there was that one close call in 2018 when we had our FOCO game over out at Queens, but other than that, smooth sailing against the Gales.
So, planting the flag. I got to start with this piece, a leftover from FBS. Planting the flag. Is there anything dumber than planting the flag at the end of a rivalry game? And I'll go to Gord first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reflective of a larger football culture thing right now, which is that it's not enough to just beat an opponent anymore and walk off with satisfied with the knowledge that your opponent knows that you just beat them. You have to let them know. You have to kind of stunt on them a little bit, and it's something that for me as a coach really, really bothers me, and I feel like for me as a player was really not my style and something I would not have approved my teammate doing either. And so it's kind of frustrating to see how much it's pervaded the culture. One thing I did like to see though, with that in mind, is Steve Sarkisian breaking the trend, seeing his guys starting to celebrate on the Texas A&M logo last night and running over to go grab them and pulling them off that mark and going, hey, we don't do that. We don't do that here. And I would love to see more coaches take that responsibility on themselves. It's not entirely their responsibility, but I would love to see more coaches take that initiative. Yeah, I don't love it. At the same time, I also hear the argument of, well, you know what? If you have that big of a problem with your home field getting disrespected, I feel like it was just disrespected over the last 60 minutes when you've lost on home turf. So there's that as well. But I don't love what it tells us about the larger football culture right now.
Alex, do you echo what Gord says about the football culture? And do you think there's a big overreaction to this?
No, I completely agree with Gord. If that were to happen in a youth sports game, especially with coaches like Greg Marshall or Michael Fultz, you would see players running stairs immediately after that for maybe a couple hours, and then up at 4:00 in the morning. It hasn't really infected Canadian college football yet, or hopefully never. But yeah, I don't think it was an overreaction. I think that this is a problem that I first saw when I think Baker Mayfield did it a few years ago, and it just became a thing. I don't know if it was a huge trend before that, but yeah, it's just not something you want to see.
Okay, FCS playoffs coming up. Pick a game, pick a team, and tell me why you like them so much. Because earlier in this show, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how the FCS is the most underrated of them all, and I'll go to Alex first.
Yeah, so my eyes are on the state of Montana this week for the FCS. I love what tight end Rohan Jones has been able to do. He's from Montreal. He leads the team with 8 touchdowns. He led the team with 451 receiving yards. He's the 11th highest graded tight end in PFF in the NCAA. He calls himself an offensive weapon in his social media bios, and that's exactly what he's going to be against an unranked UT Martin. So I got to pick number 1, Montana State.
Yeah, that's a great call. Montana State's got a great chance to take the whole thing home, and it's a great full circle moment for us because I remember talking about Rohan on our very first program this year when there was only about 4 games being played on week 0, and he was one of the guys that we wanted to watch. He had a really good season transferring there over from Maine. One of the teams I want to keep an eye on, we talked about Joey Corcoran in New Hampshire quite a bit. They've quietly had a pretty good season at that level by their standards. They are ranked going into this. They're going to host their first round matchup. And Corcoran, a little bit quiet the last couple weeks, but he has been the guy to come up with a clutch play for them whenever they've needed to. So he's a guy I wanted to mention. But the team I'm actually focused on that I think is a really fun story at this level over the last couple of years is Idaho. And Amari Notice is chipping in on the defensive line for those Vandals. But they're not only a team that plays in a great venue, one of the best in the country, in my opinion, in the Kibbie Dome, but a team that has been kind of taken its lumps over the last couple of decades. It basically got relegated from the FBS because it was struggling so much. It took a while even to get its feet underneath it at the FCS level as well, had its struggles there, and is finally working its way back to relevance under Coach Jason Eck, who's done an excellent job at that institution. I love to see the Vandals bouncing back and being relevant again, because I remember growing up, keeping an eye on college football, and that was a team that was always in my consciousness. So they're one that I'm going to keep an eye on as well.
Good Lethbridge guy getting the head coaching job in Edmonton. Mark Killam, a graduate of the University of Alberta, but his coaching path took him through high school at Cochrane, winning 3 provincial championships, and then he came on as a strength and conditioning coach to the Calgary Stampeders staff before he moved up in the ranks with the Stampeders. Is there a single path for a Canadian coach, Gord, to pursue to get to the next level? Or are there many different paths, or is it just ad hoc?
I mean, I think that there's many different paths. I don't think that there's any real noted pathway that if you want to go be a coach this level, you need to follow. But I do think the one thing that is common thread for anybody who wants to move up the coaching ranks in this country is you need to be willing to sacrifice a lot of your time, a lot of your earning potential, to be perfectly honest, and sacrifice your roots and be willing to move around. I mean, I think of a guy like Jordan Lennon, a guy I knew pretty well growing up, who's now with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and he has bounced all over the place at the junior level. He dabbled in the NFL a little bit briefly. He's been in the CFL with 3 different organizations now at this point in time. And you just kind of have to follow wherever the wind blows and the opportunity presents itself. I should have mentioned SFU. He was there for a bit as well. So he has kind of gone all over the place. And if you look at the road up the ladder, no matter where you come from, that ladder usually has many rungs to it. And it is a very incremental process. And even once you get to, say, the CFL level, if that's your ultimate goal, there are a lot of lateral shifts. It is very rare for a coach like Mark Killam, for example, to stay in one CFL market as an assistant for a long period of time without moving out of it, as he did in Calgary. Far more often for these guys, they're bouncing from market to market to market, coast to coast to coast, to make ends meet, and you see that in the university ranks as well. So if you are a young aspiring coach out there, I would say the number one thing that you need to be aware of: be ready to move anywhere and everywhere, and to do so on an annual basis potentially.
Alex, talk to me about silos and groups within U Sports, though, and mentorship in U Sports, developing coaches. Who are the leaders in your mind?
So obviously, I mean, I played 4 years at Western. I was under Coach Marshall the whole time, and he has had a huge coaching tree with both former players and former assistant coaches. I've counted at least, I believe it's 8 or 9 now. 5 of them are former players that are now coaches somewhere else. 2 head coaches, 2 offensive coordinators, 1 position coach. That includes head coach Michael Falls out of Laurier. He was Western QB 05 to 09. Head coach JP Cercelli in Windsor. OC Joe Cercelli, OC Stevenson Bone in UBC. It just shows that Marshall has passed on a culture of intensity and compassion that's become the blueprint in many U Sports locker rooms, who have now become their own leaders in their own right.
Mike Falls was on this show a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the inability to have resources to get young coaches into the system. Gord, do you think that this is where Quebec has a leg up because CJEP coaches are paid coaches? It's professionalized at that level?
I think so. I mean, I can speak really with much expertise only about the local market here in BC. And one of the challenges here in BC is that if you're not already coaching at the university level, you're either coaching at the junior level, which is a real rough and tumble existence, or you're coaching at the high school level here, which of course isn't even Canadian football. So there's a real lack of areas in which to cut your teeth. And in order to do so, as you kind of alluded to, like, you're going to have to take peanuts to do it. Oftentimes you're on a term contract. You're making, a couple $1,000 for the entire season to do that job. There's not a lot of stability to it. There's not a lot of money in it. You're driving around. I mean, for the junior teams, a lot of them practice late into the evening. And so it's a tough life to pay your dues. And it's not for, I'm not even going to say it's not for everybody. It's not for a lot of people. And so unfortunately, what that does is it puts up a barrier that stops a lot of people from even getting into that level before it begins. I just speaking for myself personally, I think that my coaching skills are perfectly capable of tackling levels above high school where I currently am. But does that fit into my lifestyle? No, it doesn't. And so that has been kind of a non-starter for me, though I still kind of hold that pipe dream every now and then of, well, I would love to go coach at the U Sports ranks and cut my teeth at that level. That would require probably relocating, taking a huge pay cut to do so, and all those other upheavals. And it's just, it goes back to being a non-starter time and time again. So I think that's definitely a big barrier in this country. And then you add in how sparse the university programs are around the country that offer those opportunities for players coaches. Now all of a sudden you have another great barrier. For me, if UBC doesn't decide that they have a job for me, well, if I want to go into the university ranks, then I need to relocate entirely to another province. It's not like it's nearby. So those are barriers that some of those exist in the States as well, but those are definitely barriers that block some of the coaches, these young, up-and-coming coaches, from being able to cut their teeth effectively in the industry.
Alex, how do you see things improving for younger coaches to do a tutelage under a Greg Marshall or a Mike Faltz?
Well, I think the light at the end of the tunnel is that more players are seeing that they can become coaches for either the team that they played for or another team across the way. But I do agree with Gord a lot. I saw that in my time at Western. Most position coaches at Western are teachers. They have full-time jobs as teachers around London. When I was playing high school ball, most of my coaches were first responders, firefighters, police officers. So it was a lot tougher up here than in the United States, where you have a lot of that money to move around to different coaches, even at the high school level. But I do see, especially with players as recent as Alex Taylor and Stevenson Bone, who are both guys that I played with, who had aspirations to become coaches and leaders. And so I think it's good that players are now having leaders in place in their on their teams, where they have a head coach who's able to mentor them to become to take over or to become a coach in their own right later on.
Guys, thanks very much for this. Coming up, Glen Constantin, the head coach of the Vanier Cup champion Rouge Et Or. And welcome back to Gridiron Nation on TSN, everyone. I'm joined by the one, the only, the national champion, head coach of the Laval Rouge Et Or, Glen Constantin. Glen, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
You've had so many of these things, and if you ask a guy like Red Auerbach, or if you ask anyone, maybe even a Tom Brady, what was it like to win this championship in comparison to the other championships, they could give you different answers about different teams. How different was this championship in comparison to all the others?
Oh, there's a couple of things. Actually, the first that comes to mind to me is that we're a much younger team. We only have a handful of guys who are fourth and fifth year guys. So we had a bunch of young guys who actually had to compete against Montreal for the last 2 or 3 years or 4 years with some of the guys, which is a very difficult task, and to play them 3 times in a row in the same season it is difficult. And that I thought that we, as a young team, we grew up and matured quickly during the season and to peak at the right time, obviously.
There was a team that beat the Calgary Dinos in Quebec City for the Vanier Cup. I'm trying to place, I think it might be about 2015, 2016, where you had a young team that matured quickly. Are those two teams similar?
Very much so. I mean, the only thing is we have a senior quarterback who should come back for a 5th year, but the rest of the team was very young also. So it's a good comparison.
Talk to me about the play of Arnaud Desjardins throughout this year. He was really on the offensive side, the straw that stirred the drink, wasn't he?
Yes, and it's a good story because he should I don't think he was the head Creighton nominee. He wasn't the winner, but he was certainly the comeback player of the year for us. He had a really tough 23 season, and to his credit, he bounced back. He worked very hard since January, and I think he grew up as a leader. And he's obviously in the Vanier Cup he was like 22 for 22 at one point. He's kind of a a game manager. He's like a point guard. He distributes the ball very well. But I mean, that doesn't make him just because he's a better quarterback than just a manager. But he had a great season. I think he threw 2 picks during the whole season, and for like whatever number of touchdowns, he was definitely the point guard of our offense, and he did a great job at that.
The group of us just had a discussion about coaching earlier on the show. And, I want to talk a little bit about CJEP and the impact that it has on teams in Quebec. And quite frankly, on our national team. Canada would not have won a World Junior Championship gold medal if it wasn't for the 21 kids from CJEP that were playing on that team. They were the absolute backbone. They were well trained. How much does the CJEP system mean to everyone at the next level in the RSEQ, and how does it make your job easier?
Well, I think there's the twofold. I think if you look at I think Quebec is one of the best coached provinces in the country, and that goes. I think it'd be Saskatchewan as being the other one, and in Ontario. And if you look at the Canada Cup, often these teams are in the finals, because the first argument that people say about CJEP, kids are older, but in the U18s, they're all U18s. So I think there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and I think like the CJEP is a good system. I think it's very competitive. It's basically like a JUCO a JUCO system. The coaches there are basically making head coach money in some of the CIS school in the youth sports system. So they're very well coached. It's a serious program. It's like not like I would venture to say a kid who plays in Ontario plays football until November. Then he turns to basketball or track, and these kids are football players. They actually train year round, and it's taken very, very seriously. So it's definitely creates an edge for us, and it helps us on national level in recruiting. And when we get a player, he's a bit more mature and physically ready to play university football.
Is it something that can be duplicated anywhere else in Canada, though? I mean, I've taken a look at the age range that's there, the alignment with education, the support the government gives it. I'm not sure if this is something that could ever be duplicated. The closest that you could come to is what the CJFL does in regard to like a St. Clair College and
Yes.
working with that. But that's about as close as it gets, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, the school system are much different, and it's difficult to fund these teams like a St. Clair College. That would be the close, obviously, but I think it would be they're far and few between these schools.
What about the support that you get from the syndicate that supports your program within Laval, and the support that you get from the community? I've tried to explain it to people from outside of Quebec that, the folks in Quebec really feel a sense of ownership when their boys are on the field, unlike some other parts of the rest of Canada. How would you describe that relationship that you have with the investment community that supports the team and the greater community overall?
Well, if I start with the community, it's it goes back to in Quebec City. The fans are very passionate. They lost the Nordiques in '95, and the football team started in '95. So it basically transferred over to the football team it's a team that belongs to the city. Like our student body does not come out all that much. I would say they're probably 10 or 20% of our attendance kind of thing. But it's a very tight knit community, and they're very proud of their football team, and obviously it shows in the attendance. With regards to our team, kind of sell is basically it's a grouping of several businessmen who started that a long time ago, basically as a charity case, basically, and now it's a very good it's perceived very well to be a sponsor of the football team and the success we have on and off the field.
Yeah, we had Brian Doby on here earlier this year. He was in his final year as a coach, and I'm not saying that you should retire any day too soon, but I do know that you like to have camps occasionally in Florida, and so Florida is a retirement place. How much longer could you keep going doing this and winning championships?
Well, that to me, like I never worked a day in my life. I love my job. I get to go to work, and I'm not a big golfer. I'm not a fisherman. I'm not a hunter. I don't really have that many hobbies. And if just took the weekend off and went to see the Patriots in Boston College play, so that's my hobby. So, and I just, I've been part of a team all my life, so it'd be hard for me to just go home and be just by myself and not do anything. Eventually, as long as I can be productive and make this team progress and make our sport progress, it is beyond. And I had these other projects in the past, which that's one that I actually would love to do. But as long as I'm still healthy and I still have the desire to come to work every day, and I'm wanted here, I'll stay here as long as I can.
I tell you what, on behalf of everyone who really loves the sport, myself who spent a lifetime promoting the sport and supporting the sport, I want to thank you for raising the bar and your group for raising the bar for this sport in this country. You truly are the standard of excellence on the amateur side of the game. So thank you very much for that one.
Thank you.
Coming up, the game of the week. Welcome back to the final segment on The Nation, everyone. Gord, time for your game of the week. We're just going to focus on one because there's two big players on each side of the ball defensively.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of our prominent teams featuring Canadians are highlighting the just missed list of their conference championship game. When you think of Indiana, Miami, BYU, all of them just missed their conference championship game. Two that did make their conference championship game are playing each other, though, and it is a rematch of a game earlier this season that I dubbed what I thought probably the best group of 5 game regular season game that I've seen since that status kind of came to play, and it is UNLV and Boise State. And Boise State remains the hump that UNLV cannot get over in this recent uptick in that program. And for us, from a Canadian perspective, it is a great head-to-head matchup of defensive backs on both sides of the ball. And Jet Elad on the UNLV side for Mississauga, and Vancouver's Ty Benefield on the Boise State side. We'll start with Benefield, the sophomore from Vancouver. He'd been an impact guy for Boise State pretty much ever since he stepped onto campus. And this Boise State program, I got to tell you, Jim, it's been really remarkable how they have just continued to do their thing at this program. We think about when they first came to prominence, that big upset in the Fiesta Bowl over Oklahoma. You get the Chris Petersons going through that program and bringing them to the next level. Brian Harsin follows him up and has a great run there. And now you get to Spencer Danielson, who quietly has kept this program just climbing and climbing and climbing. It is very clearly, in my opinion, the best program outside of the Power 4 right now in the country. Ranked number 11 in the country as of me currently speaking. They have been outstanding this year. Jim, their only loss this season was on the road at number 1 ranked Oregon, and they lost by a field goal. This is the dark horse in the entire country, and Ty Benefield has been a big factor for them on defense. He is a lockdown coverage guy. Teams have stopped targeting this guy altogether. So if you look at counting stats, which is the easy thing to do for defenders, you don't necessarily see huge numbers popping off the chart. But what you do see when you watch the film is that number 0 in blue is the guy that cleans up other people's messes, because he rarely has his own messes to clean up. And so that's really impressive to talk about a true sophomore in that fashion for them. His quality of play has been very, very high, that program. Flip over to the UNLV side, Jet Elad has had a much more circuitous route to success, as has the UNLV program. But under Barry Odom, they have become a legitimate threat in the Mountain West. Clearly the second best program in that conference, but they want to make the statement that they're ready to make this jump and become the dudes in that conference. And they have to get over this Boise State hump. They haven't been able to figure out how to do it yet. When they first played in the regular season, they held the cap on Ashton Genty for a half, and it looked like they might have a shot, and then Boise State blew it open in the second half. They're going to have to figure out how they can keep that up for a full 60 minutes, and Elad's going to be a big part of that. While he is a defensive back, he's more of a hybrid guy. He jumps into the box, plays the run, probably more often than the pass in a lot of cases, especially against a Boise State. And for a guy like Ashton Genty, who is a power runner, who runs through tackles, who excels at getting the extra yard, at falling forward, Elad and all 11 defenders on the field are going to have to be very crucial in keeping a lid on this guy. And this is the book on Boise State, because if you can keep a lid on Ashton Jeanty, then you've got a shot. I don't think their passing game is particularly impressive, and so he is the key to everything. But the thing is that thus far, nobody has been able to do that, save for sort of Oregon. So to step up to Oregon's level is a big step up. It's a lot to ask for UNLV, but they were game to try earlier this season. They kept it close for a half. Let's see how things are going to go this time around, because I know that they are going to be foaming at the mouth to show that they can get this job done.
Thanks for that, Gord. Next week, Darren DuPont will be in this chair, as I will be off in Switzerland, of all places. So this is Jim Mullin saying, let's get out to the game.